It was 7:12 on a Friday evening when the last light in the building came from her office. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. I remember standing in that doorway, unsure why she had called me back after the whole floor had emptied out. Delaney looked at me, crossed the room, and turned the lock herself. The click of that latch is a sound I still hear some nights. She turned around, held my eyes, and said the words that changed everything. Keep everything today a secret. I should probably introduce myself here. My name is Emmett Calder. I am 33 years old, and until that Friday night, I would have told you my life was about as steady as a life could get. Divorced 3 years now, no kids, a one-bedroom apartment in the Reno neighborhood of Denver that I had slowly filled with furniture I actually liked instead of furniture that just filled space. I work as a senior brand designer at a firm called Meridian and Vale Creative Group, and if you had asked me back then what my life added up to, I would have said work, the gym in the early morning before anyone else showed up, and a lot of evenings alone with a half-finished design still glowing on my screen. I am not a loud person. I never really have been. After my marriage ended, I think I made a quiet decision, even if I never said it out loud, that I was going to build a life that did not need anyone's noise to feel full. Denver helped with that. The city has this way of being both busy and calm at the same time, especially where our office sits, just a few blocks from Union Station, close enough that some nights I could hear the trains pulling in while I worked late at my desk. Meridian and Vale had been my home for 3 years by then. I came in right after the divorce, still a little raw, and the man who hired me, a creative director named Walt Renner, was the closest thing I had to a mentor in this industry. Walt had this way of looking at a rough sketch and seeing the finished thing inside it before I could. He believed in me before I believed in myself, and for about 2.5 years, that belief carried a lot of my confidence. There was a campaign we built together, early on, called the Union Line Project. It was not just work to me. It was the first thing I had made since my divorce that actually felt like mine. Walt fought for that campaign in front of the whole leadership team, and for a while, it felt like we were building something that mattered. Then, without much warning, Walt was gone. The official story was early retirement. Nobody in the office really talked about the details, and I learned pretty quickly not to ask. I just knew that the office felt different after he left, quieter in a way that did not feel peaceful. I kept my head down, kept doing the work, and told myself that whatever happened up in leadership was not really my business. Delaney Ashgrove was the one who had stepped into the vice president role over client strategy around the same time I joined the company. She was 31 when all of this happened, though she carried herself like someone who had earned every year of experience twice over. She had started at Meridian and Vale at 22, fresh out of college, and by her 3rd year there, she had personally landed a client account worth $40 million. That single deal was the kind of thing people still talked about years later, in the hallway, like a piece of company folklore. She did not get her title handed to her. She built it, one account, one late night, one hard decision at a time. I knew her the way you know someone senior to you at a company. Polite conversations in the hallway, a nod in meetings, the occasional email with her name at the bottom, always efficient, always exact. She was not cold, but she was not someone who let people in easily either. There was a guardedness to her that I noticed early on, though back then I read it as professionalism and nothing more. What none of us in the design department fully understood, not at first, was just how much had happened behind those closed doors of leadership. Rumors of a merger had been floating around the office for months by that point, the kind of talk that makes everyone quietly refresh their email at the start of the day, wondering if this is the morning they find out their job does not exist anymore. Nobody had answers. We just kept working, kept our heads down, and waited for whatever was coming. I had no idea, sitting at my desk those long evenings, that someone one floor above me had already been quietly protecting my work, my team, and eventually, without either of us naming it, protecting me. It started with small things so small that if you had asked me at the time whether anything unusual was happening, I would have said no, absolutely not, nothing to report. But looking back now, I can trace almost a full year of quiet signs I simply had not learned to read yet. Signs that only make sense once you already know how the story ends. Every Monday morning, there would be a coffee sitting on my desk before I arrived. Same order, every single time. A little cream, 1 packet of sugar, extra hot, in the paper cup from the shop 2 blocks down that most people in the office never bothered walking to. I never once saw who left it there, but everyone on our floor knew whose assistant handled the executive floor's morning coffee orders, and everyone also knew that Delaney did not usually bother remembering how her employees, let alone a mid-level designer, 3 levels below her, liked their coffee. I told myself it was a coincidence, or maybe an accident from another order that had simply ended up on the wrong desk. I did not let myself think anything else, because thinking anything else would have meant admitting that someone was paying closer attention to me than made any sense. Then there were the meetings I was not in the room for. I found out much later, through a colleague who let it slip almost by accident over drinks one Friday, that more than once, when budget cuts were on the table and my team's projects were flagged for review, Delaney had quietly pushed back. Not loudly, not in a way that drew attention to herself or made her look like she was fighting for anyone in particular. She simply redirected numbers, reframed priorities, found some other line item to trim instead, moved a percentage here, delayed a hire there. At the time, I only knew that our projects kept surviving review after review, quarter after quarter, and I credited it to luck, or to the quality of the work itself. I never once considered that someone was standing between my team and the axe, absorbing the pressure of every difficult conversation so that we never even felt the weight of it land. And then there were the late nights. She had a habit of staying behind after most of the office cleared out, long after the cleaning crew had already come through with their carts, and more than once, she would find a reason to walk past my desk on her way out. "Do you have the latest files on the Cambridge account?" she would ask, even though I knew, and I think some part of me even suspected then, that she already had those files sitting in her own inbox, forwarded to her hours earlier. We would end up talking for 20 minutes, sometimes closer to an hour, leaning against opposite sides of the doorway, about nothing that had anything to do with client strategy at all, about the trains passing Union Station, the sound of them rattling the windows on the east side of the building, about a hiking trail she liked outside the city, one she said she had not been back to in years, about nothing, and somehow everything, the kind of conversation that only makes sense to 2 people, standing exactly where we were standing. I remember one particular evening, maybe 8 months before that Friday when everything changed, walking past her office later than usual, and seeing her standing at a low filing cabinet in the corner, one I had never once seen opened in 3 years of working there. She was running a cloth over the surface of it, slow, careful, the kind of attention you give something that actually matters to you, not the kind of attention you give ordinary office furniture that nobody ever looks at twice. In her other hand, she was holding a small brass key on a strip of ribbon, worn soft and faded to a dull navy blue from years of handling, the kind of fading that only happens when something has been carried in a pocket, over and over, for a very long time. I knocked on the doorframe, more out of habit than intention, and asked her what was in the drawer. She looked up at me, and for just a second, something crossed her face that I could not name. Something quick and unguarded that vanished almost before I could register it. Then it was gone, replaced by that same composed, professional expression she always wore in front of the rest of the office. "Old stuff," she said. "Nothing important," but her hand did not leave that key. Not once, for the entire conversation that followed, a conversation that drifted, as ours often did, into something easier and warmer than the question that had started it. I remember thinking it was strange, filing it away as one of those small, unexplainable moments you notice about a person and then let go of, because you have no reason yet to think it matters, no reason yet to think it is the first thread of something much larger. There was another evening, closer to 6 months before everything came to a head, when I walked into her office to drop off a report and found her sitting very still at her desk, looking at an old photograph she must have pulled out of a drawer only moments before. When she noticed me, she slid it under a folder quickly, casually, like it was nothing at all, I caught only a glimpse before it disappeared, a younger version of her, standing next to a man I did not recognize at the time, both of them laughing at something outside the frame, some joke or moment the photograph had not managed to capture. I did not ask. It was not my place to ask. Or so I told myself. Standing there in the doorway with a report in my hand and a question I did not let myself voice. Looking back now, with everything I understand today, I can see clearly what she was carrying during all those quiet months. She was not just protecting a department budget line, the way I assumed at the time if I thought about it at all. She was protecting the memory of a mentor who had been pushed out of the company for telling the truth, a body of work that had been buried before it could matter to anyone, and, somewhere along the way, without either of us deciding it out loud, she had started protecting me too. Not because of anything extraordinary I had done, just because of who I was when nobody was watching. Steady, quiet, honest about my work, even when honesty did not serve me, even when it would have been easier to say nothing at all. I think about that year a lot now, more than I probably should. How many mornings I drank that coffee without a second thought, without ever once wondering who had noticed how I took it. How many meetings I walked out of, relieved, congratulating myself quietly on dodging another round of cuts, never once realizing there was a hand steering things from a floor above me. How many nights I sat across from her in that doorway, talking about hiking trails and train schedules, thinking it was simply two coworkers who happened to get along well, when in truth, something slower and much more real was building in the space between us the entire time, brick by brick, in a language neither of us was ready to speak out loud yet. She never said a word about any of it. Not the budget meetings. Not the drawer. Not the photograph she slid away so quickly that afternoon. She carried it all in silence, the way some people carry the things that matter most to them, folded up small enough that nobody else even notices the weight, small enough that even the person carrying it can almost convince herself it is not that heavy. I wish I could tell you I picked up on any of it sooner. I did not. I was too focused on my own steady, careful little life, the one I had built so deliberately after my divorce, to notice that someone close to me was quietly rearranging the world around us so that my life could stay steady in the first place, so that I would never even have to know how close it came to falling apart. Then the merger happened, and everything that had been sitting quiet under the surface of that office came rushing up all at once, the way water finds every crack in a dam, the moment the pressure behind it finally gets too high. I remember the morning the announcement went out, an all-staff email, dense with corporate language about synergy and growth and expanded opportunity, the kind of email that makes everyone's stomach drop a little even before they have finished reading the first paragraph. Meridian and Vail was merging with a larger advertising group out of the East Coast, and along with the merger came a wave of new leadership rotating into our Denver office. Names none of us on the design floor recognized, titles that sounded bigger than the offices they would soon be filling. One of those names hit me harder than I expected, even though at the time I did not fully understand why. Roland Wexler, managing partner, returning to Denver after nearly 2 years running the New York office of what used to be a separate company entirely. I did not know much about Roland beyond the occasional mention in old meeting notes, and one framed photo still hanging in a hallway from some event years earlier, his face half turned away from the camera. What I did not know, not yet, was that Roland Wexler had once been engaged to Delaney, that he had left for New York almost immediately after she called off the wedding, a full 1.5 years before that morning's email landed in my inbox, that his return to Denver was not some strange coincidence at all, but the direct result of a merger folding 2 companies and 2 histories back into the very same building. He introduced himself to the design floor on his second day back, walking through with that particular kind of confidence that fills a room before the person speaking has ever said anything actually worth listening to. He shook my hand a little too firmly, held it a beat too long. He said my name like he already knew it, like he had been briefed on exactly who I was before he ever set foot on our floor, which unsettled me far more than I let on at the time. Within the first week, our team's name started appearing on internal restructuring documents. Nothing official yet. Just quiet mentions in meetings I was not invited to, forwarded to me secondhand by a colleague who thought I should know, who slid a printed page across my desk without a word. Budget review, department consolidation, performance audit, words that, on their own, sound almost harmless, administrative, forgettable, until you notice they are all circling the same 6 people, the same small team, over and over again, in meeting after meeting we were never told was happening. Then came the afternoon at the copier. I was standing there, waiting for a print job that seemed to be taking forever, listening to the machine groan through page after page, when Roland walked up beside me with a single sheet of paper in his hand, folded once down the middle. He did not waste time on small talk, did not ask how I was settling into the new organizational chart the way he had with half the floor that week. "I need you to sign this," he said, sliding the paper toward me across the top of the machine. It was a performance review, dated that same week, filled with language that did not match a single piece of feedback I had ever received in 3 years at that company. Missed deadlines I had never missed. Concerns about collaboration that had never once been raised with me directly, in any meeting, by anyone. "This is not accurate," I told him, keeping my voice level even as my pulse picked up, my hand still resting on the warm paper coming out of the tray beside us. "Sign it, Emmett," he said again, quieter this time, which somehow felt worse than if he had raised his voice at me in front of the whole floor. "Do not make this more complicated than it needs to be." I asked him directly what this was actually about, because even then, some part of me sensed this had nothing to do with missed deadlines or collaboration concerns or anything printed on that page. He looked at me for a long moment, something sharp and almost amused behind his eyes, the look of a man who enjoys knowing more than the person standing across from him. "Ask Delaney about the Union Line campaign sometime," he said. "See how much she actually tells you." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there by the copier for a long time after, holding a piece of paper I had no intention of signing, turning over a name I had not thought about in nearly 3 years. Union Line. My first real project. Walt's early retirement that nobody ever fully explained. A drawer I had once seen Delaney polishing with a small brass key in her hand, her expression unreadable. The pieces were not lining up yet, not fully, but something cold had settled into my stomach that afternoon, something that stayed with me the rest of the day and followed me home, and it did not leave for days. That same week, in an entirely unrelated corner of the building, the merger's data migration was underway. IT teams working late through old servers and archived email accounts that had not been touched in years, some of them belonging to people who no longer even worked there. Priya Nathan, who handled a lot of the administrative work on our floor and had a reputation for being thorough to a fault, was assigned to help clear out old mailboxes ahead of the system's switch. She was not looking for anything in particular. She was just doing her job, clicking through folders that had not been opened since long before I had even started at the company, most of it routine, forgettable, the digital equivalent of dust. What she found, buried 3 folders deep in an account nobody had thought to check in years, was a chain of emails almost 2 years old. Messages between Roland and an outside vendor, discussing a financial arrangement that should never have existed while he was overseeing decisions about a competing campaign. Our campaign. Walt's campaign. Mine. The kind of thing that, if it had surfaced back then, would have ended his career at Meridian and Vale before it ever had the chance to reach New York. Priya did not know the full history behind any of it. She just knew enough to recognize that this was not something that belonged buried in a dead mailbox, waiting to be deleted along with everything else. She brought it straight to Delaney, quietly, the way people bring things to someone they trust when they are not entirely sure what they are holding. I did not know any of that yet, not that afternoon, not even that whole week. All I knew was that Roland Wexler had looked me in the eye and dared me to ask questions I did not yet have the context to understand, and that somewhere above me, on a floor I rarely visited, something was already moving that was about to change everything I thought I knew about the last 2.5 years of my life. It was a Wednesday evening when Delaney called me back into her office again, though this time the door was not locked before she said anything, and somehow that made it feel more serious, not less. This time, she asked me to sit down first. gesturing to the chair across from her desk instead of letting me linger in the doorway the way I usually did. She had a folder in front of her, thick, the edges worn soft from handling, the kind of softness that only comes from a folder being opened and closed hundreds of times over the years. Next to it sat that same brass key on its faded navy ribbon, the one I had seen in her hand nearly 8 months before, standing in front of that locked cabinet. She slid the folder toward me without a word, and I opened it to find my own work staring back at me. Sketches. Early drafts. Notes in Walt's handwriting along the margins. Notes I had not seen in almost 3 years because I had assumed, like everyone else on that floor, that all of it had simply been discarded when the campaign died, shredded and forgotten along with so much else from that period. I kept it, she said quietly. All of it. For 2 years. I asked her why. I think my voice came out sharper than I meant it to, because underneath the confusion, there was something closer to hurt rising up in me. The strange, specific feeling of finding out that someone had been carrying a piece of your own history around for years without ever once mentioning it to you. She told me everything then, in a way I do not think she had ever told anyone else in that building. How Roland had killed the Union Line campaign not because it was weak, not because the numbers did not support it, but because it threatened a financial arrangement he had quietly built with a competing vendor. How Walt had refused to stay silent about it once he understood what was happening, and how that refusal had cost him his job within weeks, dressed up afterward, as early retirement, so nobody would ask too many questions. How she had gone through every file before the purge could reach it, staying late for 3 straight nights, pulling everything into that one locked drawer, because some part of her refused to let 2.5 years of real, honest work simply disappear to protect one man's secret. I told myself I was doing it for Walt, she said. For you. For the work itself. And that was true. But it was not the whole truth. She looked at me directly then, in a way she almost never allowed herself to inside that office, in a way that felt like she had been rehearsing this moment in her head for longer than I wanted to imagine. I started protecting your team long before the merger, Emmett. Every budget review, every cut that never made it past my desk, that was me making sure nothing touched you or the people you worked with. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I stopped doing it only because it was right. I did it because I did not want to lose you. I have not wanted to lose you for a long time. I sat there for a moment, holding a folder full of 2.5-year-old sketches, trying to hold 2 feelings at once without letting either one win completely. There was the anger, small but real, at having been protected in silence for so long without ever being given the choice to understand what was actually happening around me, without ever being trusted with the truth of my own situation. And there was something else underneath it, warmer, harder to name, the slow, quiet recognition of just how much she had carried, alone, for longer than I had ever known, longer than I had even thought to ask. You could have told me, I said, my voice quieter now, less sharp than before. I know, she answered. I was afraid that if Roland found out I knew, before I had enough to actually stop him, he would bury it deeper than anyone could ever dig it back out, and you would lose everything with no way to fight back, no folder, no evidence, nothing. I was trying to protect the evidence until it could actually protect you. She told me about Priya then, about the emails, about the timeline stretching back nearly 2 years, proof finally sitting in black and white of exactly what Roland had done and why he had done it. And she told me the decision in front of us now was not really about her anymore, not about what she had or had not said soon enough. It was about what I wanted to do with the truth, now that I finally had it in my own hands. I could have taken that folder straight to the board and let anger do all the talking. Some part of me wanted to, if I am honest with myself even now, but sitting there, looking at Walt's handwriting in the margins of my old sketches, careful notes made by a man who never once raised his voice, I understood that this was never really about revenge. Walt had not lost his job because he was weak. He had lost it because he told the truth to people who did not want to hear it. If I brought this forward the same way Roland had operated, quietly, through pressure and threats, I would be proving nothing except that his way of doing business actually worked. I want to bring it to the board, I told her. Properly. Not to destroy him. To show them what actually happened. She nodded slowly, and for the first time since I had known her, I watched something in her shoulders loosen, like she had been holding her breath for 2 years and had only just now allowed herself, in this small office, to let it out. She reached over and placed the brass key gently into my palm, closing my fingers around it with her own. "Then I think it is time this stopped being something I carry alone," she said. The board meeting took place on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of morning Denver does particularly well. Low clouds sitting just above the mountains like they had not decided yet whether to let the sun through. I sat at the far end of a long table I had never once been invited to before. A folder of 2.5-year-old evidence squared in front of me, my hands steadier than I expected them to be, and Delaney sitting 2 seats down, steady, watching, saying nothing unless she was asked. I will not pretend it was comfortable. Laying out timelines, financial records, Priya's discovery, all of it in front of 11 people who had built careers on Roland Wexler's judgment, some of whom had known him for 20 years. It was one of the harder mornings of my professional life. But I kept coming back to one simple fact, the same fact I had told Delaney in her office days earlier, the one I repeated to myself under the table while my hands were shaking slightly. This was not about tearing anyone down. It was about putting the truth back where it belonged, after 2 years of it sitting locked in a drawer that almost nobody knew existed. By the end of that meeting, the board voted 7-1 to remove Roland Wexler from his position, effective immediately, the single dissenting vote coming from a man who admitted afterward he simply needed more time to process what he had heard. My team, the same team that had spent weeks bracing for layoffs, packing our things mentally, if not literally, was formally taken off the restructuring list that same afternoon. I remember walking out of that room feeling lighter than I had in longer than I could actually place, like something that had been sitting quietly on my chest for years, long before I even knew it was there, had finally been allowed to lift. What came after that was not dramatic. It was not a single moment where everything suddenly changed between Delaney and me. No grand gesture. No dramatic declaration in front of the whole office. It was slower than that, and I think, looking back on it now, that slowness was exactly what made it feel real, what made it feel like it would last. It started with small things again, only this time, we both knew exactly what they meant, and neither of us pretended otherwise. She stopped by my desk without pretending she needed a file. I started staying late without pretending I had actual work left to finish. We would walk out together some evenings, past Union Station, the trains pulling in under all that string lighting they hang along the platform in the colder months, and we would just talk, the way we always had, except now neither of us bothered hiding what those conversations actually were, or where they were clearly headed. About 2 months after the board meeting, she asked me if I wanted to get out of the city for a weekend, said it almost carefully, like she was still getting used to asking me for things directly, instead of finding quiet ways to give them to me. We drove up to Boulder on a Saturday morning, the kind of clear October morning where the whole Front Range looks like it has been cut out of glass. We hiked most of the day, said very little that actually needed saying, and sat on a ridge as the sun started sliding down behind the peaks, turning everything gold for about 10 minutes before the cold set back in, and we finally stood up to head down. I asked her, somewhere in that stretch of quiet up on the ridge, if there was anything else she had been holding on to that I still did not know about. I meant it half as a joke, but I watched her actually consider the question seriously, turning it over for a moment before she answered, the way she considered most things that mattered to her. She laughed, but it was not a deflection this time, not like all those months before with the filing cabinet and the photograph she had slid away so quickly. No, she said. That was the last one. 6 months passed after that weekend, the kind of ordinary, easy passage of time you do not fully appreciate until you look back and realize how much closer 2 people have grown without any single dramatic turning point to point to, without a single argument or crisis marking the way. Walt reached out eventually. Once word of what had happened at Meridian and Vale reached him through an old colleague. He did not ask to come back, and I do not think either of us expected him to, not after everything. But we had lunch downtown one afternoon, at a small place near the old office he used to favor, and I watched something ease in his face when I told him his old files had never actually been destroyed, that they had been protected the entire time, quietly, by someone he would never have guessed. By the time 8 months had passed since that Tuesday board meeting, Delaney and I had stopped pretending, even to ourselves, that this was anything other than what it had clearly become. There was a particular evening, back up in Boulder, almost exactly where we had sat that first October afternoon, when she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out that small brass key on its faded navy ribbon, the ribbon softer now than it had been the last time I saw it. She did not say much. She just placed it in my hand again, the same way she had in her office all those months earlier. Except this time there was nothing left underneath it to explain, no folder, no confession, nothing left unsaid between us. "There is nothing left to lock away," she said. "Not anymore." I looked at that key for a long time that evening, turning it over in my palm as the last light went out over the mountains, thinking about everything it had carried before it ever reached me. 2.5 years of protected work, a mentor's quiet dignity, a woman who had spent longer than I ever knew standing between me and things I never even saw coming. There was a particular Sunday in that stretch of months when we ended up back at Union Station without really planning it, just walking, the way we used to, before either of us said anything out loud about what we were to each other. We stood on the platform for a while, watching a train pull out toward the mountains, and she leaned her shoulder against mine without a word, the kind of small, ordinary gesture that would have meant nothing a year earlier and meant almost everything now. I remember thinking, standing there in the cold with the trains moving under all that string lighting, that this was the version of us I had not let myself imagine back when she was still just my boss standing on the other side of a locked office door. I think about that Friday evening more than almost any other memory I have from those years. 7:12, the door locking behind me, 5 words that sounded, at the time, like the start of something frightening. I understand it differently now. She was not locking that door to keep a secret from me. She was locking it to keep me safe long enough for the truth to actually matter, long enough for it to protect me instead of costing me everything. I still have that key. It sits on my desk now, not hidden in any drawer, just resting there in plain sight, the ribbon a little more faded than it was the last time she handed it to me. Some nights, when the office empties out, and I am the last one still at my desk, I think about how much can happen quietly, right beside you, while you are too focused on your own steady life to notice. I wonder sometimes if there is someone in your life who has been carrying something for you without ever saying a word about it. I wonder if you have ever been the one carrying it yourself, staying quiet not because you did not care, but because you cared too much to risk saying it too soon. If this story found something in you, something familiar, I would love to know. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place, sitting there that Friday night, hearing that door lock behind me. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about the quiet things people carry for the people they love, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay close. There is more waiting, and I would like to tell you the next one too.